All right, guys, I don't think there's any audio. I'm trying to find out if there's any audio. No audio is coming through. Let's see if they fix it. All right, guys, like I said.
Again, we'll be
Oh.
pieces of legislation at a later date. Now I want to take public testimony. We have two people signed up. I'd like them to come forward to the microphone. Hector Ricketts of the Commuter Van Association of New York, and Leroy Morrison, also of the Commuter Van Association of New York. Welcome, and we welcome your testimony.
Mr. Mayor, good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Thank you for your intent to sign the commuter van reform bills. It was in this very building over 20 years ago that we stood with Dr. Una Clark defending the rights of commuter vans. We lost that battle, and we ended up with local law 115. Today, thanks to the courage of Councilmember Jamani Williams and Idenique Miller, who have come from different positions, they collaborated and created something wonderful for the commuter vans. It's a good thing, Mr. Mayor. However, this legislation must be coupled with tough, consistent enforcement. Your Vision Zero is a wonderful thing for our city. It is threatened by the rogues that are running wild in the street. Every single day, there's an incident. Only on Tuesday, one of those buses collided with a school bus. It is critical, Mr. Mayor, that you give the DOT, the TLC, and the NYPD the resources to remove the rogues from our street. I thank you on behalf of all in the commuter van industry.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon.
We want to thank you from the commuter van industry. This is a long process, long way. It was a rocky road, ups and downs, and we really respect that. You really have a fair hearing for us today. And also, I want to say thanks to Councilmember Jamani Williams to take this far, and Councilmember Denique Miller, also with the Tax and Limousine Chair, Mary Joseph, to make it happen, and the Speaker, and also the Transportation Chair, also the City Council and the Speaker, to make everything is right for us. And it's a long battle that we always, when the city is in crisis, they call the commuter vans, and when the crisis is over, they forget about it. Today is a day, Mr. Mayor, that I'm very happy to see that you take care of the commuter van for all what commuter van do in New York City, and we're always here for the people, and we're not going anywhere in crisis. We're always going to be here. And Mr. Mayor, on behalf of also the council member office, Nick Smith over there, I thank him for bringing this one to light, bringing me from out of the dark to light. And I also want to thank his staff also from Brooklyn to make this happen. And it was a long road. And we finally see the light, and we're free at last. And Mr. Mayor, I'm planning to work with the city as long as we can. And God bless you and your staff and everyone that's here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to thank my colleagues from the Commuter Van Association. We've worked together for many years, and thank you for the good work you're doing to make sure that the law is enforced. I appreciate it. A few words in Spanish on all of these pieces of legislation. Hoy tuvimos una audiencia sobre 14 leyes en relación con el Programa Municipal del Arte Público, informes sobre entidades culturales de la ciudad, un informe anual de la Comisión de Diseño Público, el transporte de furgonetas, el pago de impuestos de los dueños de viviendas, la ampliación del distrito de promoción de negocios de Dumbo, la disposición de equipos electrónicos viejos de las agencias municipales, la venta de plantas y flores en el Año Nuevo Lunar y la evaluación de reducir impuestos para el desarrollo económico. With that, we will complete the hearing, and again, we look forward to seeing you at the signing of these pieces of legislation upcoming shortly in the coming days. Thank you so much.
We just streamed that just to make fun of him. And in reality, I just wanted to put it up there just for a little bit of a comedy hour, just like we did earlier with Nancy Pelosi. But it's always good to document these lefty clowns making a fool of themselves. It's always good in case of 4 years, we can come back to this and show people how stupid they are so they can actually make a more decisional, a better choice when it comes to their vote. So that's the reason why we stream these things. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for watching. I think for today we're done with streaming, but I'm not 100% sure. Just stay here with us. He's going to talk again, I guess, or somebody else is going to speak. So just stay for a little while. I'll put on some music. We'll be back. We're not shutting down the stream, by the way.
Check 1 2.
Remember, for more information about New York,
All right, so I got some new information. It looks like anti-American New York City Mayor de Blasio is going to hold a news conference on President Donald Trump's immigration policies. He said before that he is going to stay firm and continue to make New York City a sanctuary city, which is the dumbest shit he can possibly do. But, it is the way it is with the left. So just stay tuned. And once he goes up on the podium, I'll put the stream up. 1 second.
to address the important topic of immigration and the undocumented.
All right, so it looks like all the mayors with cities that are sanctuary cities are getting triggered right now, and they're starting to hold press conference and talk about what's going on with immigration. So give me 1 second. This is live from Seattle. So it says Seattle Mayor Murray is to hold press conference in response to Trump's executive order on immigration. Give me a second.
They're encouraged to communicate with Seattle police officers without fear of inquiry regarding their immigration or alien status. Being undocumented in this country, barring any criminal activity, is a federal civil violation not enforced by the Seattle Police Department. So I want to make that clear. We care deeply about people in our community, particularly the most vulnerable. And often those people who are undocumented are most vulnerable in our community. We want to be there for them to ensure that they're safe and our communities are safe. With me today I have Deputy Chief Carmen Best. Carmen serves with me on a national law enforcement immigration task force, a group of police leaders across the country who have engaged in sensible discussion about this and have spoken out on the issue of immigration and police policies relating to immigration. We have Perry Tarrant, another assistant chief of ours, who is serving currently as the president of NOBLE, the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Executives. NOBLE released a statement that aligns with our policy here in Seattle. We are not alone. The major city chiefs of police are also stating that there's no place for civil violations to be enforced by local police in our country. The relationship with our community, included the undocumented, is too important to us. In fact, the major city chiefs, I'll read an excerpt from their policy. They feel that local enforcement undermines the trust and cooperation with immigrant communities, which are essential elements of community-oriented policing. So I want you to know that not only do we feel strongly about this here in Seattle, but police leaders across the country are aligned on this issue, particularly major city chiefs. I've been asked several times about federal funding we receive. And I'll give you a sense for some of the federal funding we get currently in the Seattle Police Department. We get funding to support our efforts in internet crimes against children. We get funding to support our human trafficking task force. We get funding for crime prevention coordinators. We get funding to assist women who are coming back to the community after being in prison for some time. We also get some funding to support additional hiring here in Seattle. These are very, very important projects, and we will work not only locally with the mayor, but with our law enforcement colleagues nationally to ensure that those funds are not jeopardized. The U.S. Conference of Mayors is working very closely with the Major City Chiefs Association on this particular issue. And I encourage you to look at the information that's been published by the Major City Chiefs. Of course, we're concerned about people who carry guns, who are involved in drugs, who are involved in gangs, who are involved in trafficking. And if they're undocumented, we're going to enforce the law against them as we will with anybody else. But the vast majority of undocumented people in our community are law-abiding people, and we need to work with them as a police service. So I thank you. Again, I thank my team for feeling very strongly about this, and for the Seattle police officers who are out there who understand the importance of our relationship with our community, including our undocumented community. And I look forward to continuing our participation in sensible conversations here locally and nationally on this very important issue. Thank you.
Just a note to the media. There is different definitions of what a welcoming or a sanctuary city is, and my staff will be available afterwards to clarify some pretty complex legal issues that I suspect the administration hasn't thought through. It's now my honor to introduce members and co-leaders in our efforts here in Seattle. Councilmember Gonzalez, followed by Councilmember Juarez, followed by Councilmember Herbal. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mayor. Our city charter is what we are all bound by every day in the performance of our duties to the people of Seattle. The charter is the law of the city, and it states that our purpose is to protect and enhance the health, safety, environment, and general welfare of the people, to provide services and meet the needs of the people, and to allow fair and equitable participation of all persons in our city life. The founders and good people of Seattle had the common sense to recognize our values even then and memorialized it in our charter. We are clearly obligated to treat all people in our city equally and provide all people in our city with critical services without regard to immigration status or religion. And that is what we will continue to do in this city. Today, I've received emails from Seattle residents begging that we stay strong in the face of a threat of financial duress by the Trump administration. And that is what we will do. Today's executive orders are being sold to the American people as necessary to public safety. But let me be clear, these orders do not keep us safe. Today's executive orders represent prejudice. They represent prejudice and will only serve to foster suspicion amongst our neighbors, reminiscent only of what we saw in the Cold War and in World War II. The president's wall on the U.S.-Mexico border does not represent safety or national security. It represents isolationism and hate. The president's rejection of refugees from Muslim-majority countries does not reduce terrorism. It is an act of prejudice. Our most pronounced symbol in America is one of immigrants fleeing their countries of origin, seeking refuge, and one that President Trump grew up with in his own neighborhood, the Statue of Liberty. Her inscription reads in part, "Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." This president's actions fly in the face of those American values, and one is left to wonder, frankly, how long it will be before we see an executive order mandating that we return the Statue of Liberty to the people of France. Today's executive orders also feel like a little bit of deja vu for many of us, myself included, that have been fighting for immigrant justice and comprehensive immigration reform for years. Here at home, we have made it clear that it is not the city, county, or state's job to enforce federal immigration laws, much less archaic, broken, and inhumane immigration laws. That is the sole responsibility of the federal government, and we will not be coerced, bullied, or otherwise forced to become an extension of the Department of Homeland Security. Nor will we allow Seattle to become a DHS playground where they can declare open season on Muslims, immigrants, and refugees. Not yesterday, not today, not ever. But I'll tell you what we will do. We will fight. We stand as one today and every day to protect those who are too afraid to protect themselves. We stand as one today and every day to protect those who all too often feel invisible and voiceless. We stand as one today and every day to say, love will always trump hate. As a city council member, I commit to aggressively fighting back with you, shoulder to shoulder. Because I come to this work not just as a former civil rights attorney, not just as a council member, but as the daughter of Mexican immigrant parents. I grew up in a bilingual home at the height of the English-only campaign. My parents were once undocumented immigrants before eventually becoming legal citizens. I have relatives who today live in the shadows every day, seeking and chasing the opportunity and American dream that this country has promised them. And I grew up in the lower Yakima Valley in the 80s, in an area that was ravaged by harsh enforcement of immigration laws. This isn't just my work and duty as a council member, it's personal. And to that end, this Monday, January 30th at 2 p.m. in council chambers, I will introduce a welcoming city resolution because now is the time to double down on our values. I am doing this in conjunction with Seattle's Immigrant and Refugee Commission and the mayor, and this resolution will reaffirm and double down on the city's commitment to protect, serve, and support our Muslim, immigrant, and refugee brothers and sisters. And today, I call upon my colleagues to join me in pursuing every legal remedy available to protect Muslims, refugees, and our undocumented neighbors. We must take this administration to task by putting these executive actions through the rigor of legal and constitutional analysis in a court of law. This is how we push back. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Deborah Juarez, and I sit on Seattle City Council, and I could tell you today, on one hand, I've never been more prouder to be a resident of Seattle, to have my mayor and my city council articulate who we are in this city and what we believe in. Today, President Trump signed an executive order on immigration, and yesterday he signed an executive order to expedite the Dakota Access Pipeline development. We all know that the Dakota Pipeline and what's going on, it isn't just a protest. It's protecting water and the environment and the treaties, which are the supreme law of the land. I stand today in solidarity with Seattle, the great state of Washington, and our country. We are America. I am America. I'm an enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation. I'm also Latina. So I look at this country where I have been here. I am America. I belong. And my other side of my family, my Juarez side, belong here as well. We stand to ensure and to make sure and unite that the President acts within the boundaries of the limits of the United States Constitution. And as a Native American, as a lawyer who have fought for Indian rights, tribal rights under the United States Constitution for over 30 years, I know what it's like to have to fight. Of grave concern, and this is to you, Mr. President, you are violating our U.S. Constitution and the laws of our great country. Treaties are the supreme law of the land, and as such, those rights and loyalties must be honored. Article 1, Section 8, and Article 6 of the United States Constitution. Also, Mr. President, your ownership in stock and the company building the 1,200-mile pipeline is of grave concern. You will profit as a president from this illegal domestic project. Again, Mr. President, you have violated that order to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. It's time that we look at our Constitution and we use it. We use it as a shield and we use it as a sword, and the time is now. And I remember how we all felt the day after the election, but I remember how I felt 10 days before the election. It was already there. Some of us have lived that life, and we know that life, and we're ready. I am not afraid. I'm ready. Today, Mr. President, we are a nation of laws. We are a nation of respect for civil rights, human rights, and more importantly, humanity. We are a country of doing what's right and just and what needs to be done, and that is what made us a great country. Look around us today and the people that you see. This is America, and I am proud of this city and what we're going to do. I'm particularly touched and proud of Councilmember Gonzalez and her struggle and how hard she's worked. She's dedicated her personal and professional life to protecting those communities that need protected most. And for that, I will always be at her side as a sister in this struggle. And so to you, Mr. President, I say this. The North Star is still the North Star. Day is still light. The sun will still rise in the east and set in the west. Love is still right. And regardless of your alternative facts and your crazy reality that you're living in, we are still here. And again, Mr. President, water is still life. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to also thank my colleagues that are here. And more importantly, again, I want to say I have never been prouder to serve the city of Seattle. Thank you.
Welcome. I'm Lisa Herbold. I'm a city council member representing District 1 in West Seattle. I also chair the Council Civil Rights Committee. In addition to the assault on the rights of our valued immigrant community members, earlier this week we also learned that the words civil rights were removed from the White House website. This in the face of millions of people marching to preserve our rights this week. So too was information for people with disabilities and an option for Spanish translation.
Hundreds of cities that work with their immigrant populations, including their undocumented immigrants. Here in this city, a community numbering almost 500,000 people. Hundreds of American cities where this executive order could undermine public safety, create a rift and a disconnect between police departments and those they serve, and take away funding from law enforcement. That's the potential magnitude of what we face here. But at the same time, it is important to understand that in New York City, this executive order does not change who we are or how we will go about doing our work. The stroke of a pen in Washington does not change the people of New York City or our values, does not change how this city government protects its people. The executive order will not change how we enforce the law in New York City or how we do business on behalf of the people, all 8.5 million New Yorkers. This is a city of immigrants. We always have been for almost 400 years. This is our fundamental nature. You look at all those gathered around me, I want to thank all the leaders of this administration and other key partners who have gathered here. And if you look at this group of New Yorkers, we represent nations all over the globe in terms of the backgrounds of our families. This is a picture of the immigrant experience right here before you. It's also a picture of a city that works and a city that respects all people, tries to include everyone and respect their rights. This is the American dream right before your eyes, and we are not going to allow it to be undermined. We're going to defend all of our people, regardless of where they come from and regardless of their documentation status. We are also proud of the fact that New York City is the safest big city in America. It's because of the extraordinary work of the men and women of the NYPD, but it's also because of the work of so many partners and communities all over the city who help the NYPD in its work, who trust the NYPD, who provide information and support to the NYPD, who help our officers to stay safe. We're a city in which people, regardless of documentation status, know they can report a crime, or if they're a victim of a crime, can come forward, witness to a crime, they can come forward and know that information will be used to keep us all safe, but it will not be used to deport them. That fundamental compact that goes back in this city decades through Democratic, Republican, and independent administrations here in New York City is one of the reasons why we became the safest big city in America. And we're not going to undermine the progress the NYPD has made over a quarter century. The spirit of this executive order runs contrary to our character and our values as a city, and I would argue it runs contrary to the character and values of the United States. Now, as we've looked at the executive order just in the last hour or two, we do want to let the people of New York City know that there is less here than meets the eye. This executive order is written in a very vague fashion. We believe that not only will it be susceptible to many legal challenges, but that it will meet with tremendous public resistance all over the nation, that there will be a fundamental sense of unfairness recognized in this executive order, and that the legal issues that will be raised could fundamentally change the outcome. I want to note that we believe we are on solid ground for a legal challenge to the executive order should the occasion arise and be necessary. Specifically, among other reasons, specifically because some recent years ago when the federal government tried to withhold unrelated funding from states in a similar action, none other than Chief Justice John Roberts wrote an opinion in the Supreme Court case NFIB versus Sebelius 2012, which prohibited the federal government from broad brush withholding of funds, and Justice Roberts wrote that such an action would be the federal government, quote unquote, holding a gun to the head of states and cities. So that broad brush action was banned by the United States Supreme Court. Following that logic, a narrow application of the executive order means that money that would be withheld from law enforcement, specifically from the NYPD. So the sum total would be both an unfair action that would cause a rift between the NYPD and the communities it serves, while simultaneously taking resources away from the NYPD that it uses to keep us safe. A double jeopardy for the NYPD. Notwithstanding the challenges and problems we see here, it's important to remind all New Yorkers that the NYPD, Department of Corrections, the City of New York, has been cooperating with the federal government over these last years in terms of sharing information and working in cases involving individuals who have committed 170 different offenses. This is public record. Hold it up here, and we will distribute it. These are a list of the 170 offenses that by city law trigger specific cooperation between the City of New York and the federal government in the case of an undocumented individual. These are serious offenses, violent crimes. This is the law of New York City, has been for years, and has been the basis for productive cooperation with the federal government. This works. It has been working. It's helped to keep us safe without undermining the relationship between our police and our communities. This will continue. But we will not deport law-abiding New Yorkers. We will not tear families apart. We will not leave children without their parents. We will not take breadwinners away from families who have no one else. And we're not going to undermine the hard-won trust that has developed between our police and our communities. The NYPD began this day winning the war against crime and terror, using the right approach, and that approach will continue tomorrow. A few words in Spanish. Nueva York ha sido un lugar inclusivo desde antes que el presidente firmara su orden ejecutiva y sigue siendo inclusiva. Esta orden no puede cambiar lo que somos. Somos una ciudad de inmigrantes y la ciudad de la oportunidad. Esto no es un asunto que afecta solo a algunos grupos. Somos todos Nueva York. With that, I want to introduce our Police Commissioner, Jimmy O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I started off today I gave the NYPD, the State of the NYPD at a Police Foundation breakfast this morning. I talked about all the gains we've made, not only over the last 3 years, but over the last 25 years. And if you look at where New York is right now, with homicides down in 2016, a tremendous reduction in shootings, down over 12%, overall crime down 4%, and we're starting out 2017 in a pretty good place, too. You know, I don't want to do anything that would put any of that at risk, and a huge part of that is our neighborhood policing program. And in neighborhood policing, the goal there is, of course, is to keep New Yorkers safe, but it's also to build trust. And we build trust by having that connection between the communities that we're sworn to protect and serve and the police officers. And again, I wouldn't want to do anything to put that at risk. Every day we work closely with our federal partners, specifically the FBI, the Marshal Service, the DEA, and the ATF. And it's in conjunction with our federal partners that we continue to push crime down. I wouldn't want to do anything to jeopardize that. The U.S. Marshal Service, the Regional Fugitive Task Force, continue to do an outstanding job going after the worst of the worst that commit crimes in this city, or if they commit crimes in other cities and come here. So the financial backing for these efforts comes from a pool of money from the federal government. Part of that funds the overtime for those task forces. And there's also the UASI funds that we've spoken about in the past, the Urban Area Security Initiative. That's about $110 million that we use to protect this great city. And that money goes towards radiological detection equipment, highly trained vapor wake dogs. We've spoken about that in the past. Our intelligence analysis, the Lower Manhattan Security Initiative, our network of public and private cameras that aid in numerous investigations, training and equipment for the NYPD's bomb squad, which most recently proved itself invaluable in the investigation of the Chelsea bombing. So again, wouldn't want to put any of that at risk. We already removed the worst criminals from New York, including those who have been convicted of serious crimes and have been deported, and violent felons. So I think there's a very delicate balance in New York City right now. I think that's why we're doing so well, and to do anything that would eat at that trust, I think would be a disservice to the people of this great city. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now I want to introduce the Speaker of the City Council, Melissa Mark Viverito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Commissioner, my colleagues. Vanessa Gibson, my colleague and chair of the Public Safety Committee. You know, for me, this is a sad day in these United States of America in terms of what it was that President Trump presented today. So if there was ever any doubt in anyone's mind whether Donald Trump's hateful, bigoted rhetoric truly reflected his intentions, today's executive orders affirm that his agenda will take our country down a dangerous and divisive path. If this is his idea of immigration reform, and he did use that when he had his press conference and spoke about his executive orders, he's simply delusional. This isn't reform. This doesn't fix our problems. This simply creates heartache for millions of families, and as the commissioner said, potentially puts this city at risk. But our city knows better. Let's be clear, these proposals are driven by the false narrative that immigrants, all immigrants, are criminals. So what President Trump seems to forget is that America is a nation of immigrants. New Yorkers know that immigrants contribute to our economy, our culture, and our community. They are our friends, our coworkers, and our neighbors. We're not here to defend any criminal offenders. In fact, our laws do not provide that protection, as the mayor clearly indicated. But what you're seeing today, and actually I was the key author of both of those pieces of legislation. In fact, our laws do not provide that protection, but what you're seeing today from the Trump administration is a deflection of the true issues that we have at hand. Why aren't we talking about tightening the loopholes in our gun laws? Why aren't we talking about the thousands of gun violence victims? Utilizing families and their pain or criminalizing undocumented immigrants is part of the false narrative that Trump continues to hold up. So today, I want to send a very clear message to New Yorkers and to the Trump administration. Although there are many unknowns, one thing is certain. The City Council's commitment, this city's commitment to supporting our immigrant communities is unwavering. We will continue to build and expand on our laws and policies to do everything in our power to protect our communities. And we will uphold the rule of law and defy any attack by the president to force us to violate the constitutional rights of our residents. We will resist, we will defy, and we will stand by New Yorkers. If I could just say a few words in Spanish. Hoy hemos visto muy claramente que el presidente Donald Trump tiene todas las intenciones de dividir a nuestro país y separar a nuestras familias. Él puede decir que sus acciones ejecutivas son parte de una reforma migratoria, pero eso es absurdo. Esto no es una reforma, esto no soluciona nuestros problemas, esto solo causa temor en nuestras familias. Así que dejemos algo muy claro. Estas decisiones están tomando lugar porque el presidente Trump opina que todos los inmigrantes son criminales, que somos malas personas. Lo que Trump no sabe es que los Estados Unidos es un país de inmigrantes, enriquecido gracias a los inmigrantes. Utilizar a nuestras familias y criminalizar a los inmigrantes indocumentados es simplemente parte de la falsa y alarmante narrativa de Trump. Así que vamos a decir algo y vamos a dejarlo claro. Esta ciudad no dejará de apoyar a nuestra comunidad de inmigrantes. Continuaremos expandiendo nuestras leyes y políticas para hacer todo lo posible para proteger a nuestros inmigrantes y defenderemos la Constitución de este país para que nadie pueda violar los derechos civiles de nuestros residentes.
Thank you very much. Finally, I want you to hear from a man who represents literally one of the most diverse congressional districts in the United States of America and is one of the leaders of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, Congressman Joe Crowley.
Mr. Mayor, how are you? Mr. Commissioner, how are you? Good to see you. I'm sad to be here this evening, but I am proud to be here as well. So I want to thank the Mayor, the Commissioner, the Speaker, the members of the Council, the administration that's here today to stand up for not just immigrant New York, but all New York and the values of our country. This week, we've seen some remarkable changes made in just 5 days that have really turned around, in many respects, the direction of the focus of the last 75 years of our nation. The good news is that simply by executive order, you can't change the world overnight, but it's very scary in terms of what this man has been about. After hearing that maybe there was a bigger crowd at previous inaugurations than at his inauguration, he went to the CIA at the Wall of Honor and really spent very little time talking about the men and women who had sacrificed their lives for information that was given to our country to help win the Cold War, to win other wars as well, and to help keep us safe after 9/11. No city knows it better than we do, the effects of terrorism. And he used that opportunity to talk about himself and his alternative facts. We know that the president today used the opportunity in terms of the executive order to have the families of victims of crime, people who had been murdered by undocumented, in his words, illegal aliens, in the president's words. Our hearts, and I think I speak on behalf of the mayor and everyone in this room, go out to each and every one of those families, the victims of crime. But to take that as an opportunity to blanket all people who have come to this country for a better way of life, that is immoral. That is immoral, to do that, to use those people. So my wife, Casey, says, don't pay attention to what he says, watch what he does. And this executive action is immoral. It is actually going to limit the ability for our law enforcement individuals, folks, just like what he's done at the national level with our intelligence folks. Commissioner O'Neill needs intelligence. That's right. This is going to shut down intelligence gathering in this city. It's going to shut down the ability of our law enforcement folks to get information from law-abiding individuals who want to expose the criminal element within this city, within the immigrant population as well. Much of that will be shut down now out of fear that they themselves will be deported. This has been a policy that has been in place here in New York City over administration after administration, including the Giuliani administration. This is not Democrat and Republican. It's not just Democrats. Republicans have also enforced this very same procedure. So as an author of the OASI accounts, post 9/11 again, to make sure that we get all the resources we need from our federal government to protect us from foreign people who are terrorists, who want to attack our nation and everything we stand for, this scares the daylights out of me. For a cheap political stunt that he would threaten to withhold funding to our law enforcement that can make us vulnerable to a terrorist attack, that's immoral. It has to be called out for what it is. So I want to applaud the mayor again, the commissioner. We're a donor state to the federal government. We give more to the federal government than we get back. And I would imagine that most of the so-called sanctuary cities come from donor states. They give more than they get back. And you know what? New Yorkers are getting tired more and more that we're a donor state and we have other states and states electing people like Donald Trump who then come in and dictate to us that we're going to get less than we deserve to keep our citizens safe. So I applaud the mayor, the commissioner, all the electeds, and part of the administration for being here today and standing up for what is right. This is not the American way. I'm the son and grandson of immigrants. This is not the American way. This is not what we have been about over the last 75 years. And Donald Trump needs to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Okay, with that, we want to thank you very much, Congressman, for that very powerful statement. And I think we're all feeling that same passion today. We welcome your questions on the executive order. Yeah.
Mayor, at a practical level, how much can the president withhold money that is earmarked for law enforcement? And I also wondered if you see what you're doing now as an act of civil disobedience against the federal government.
I do not see it as civil disobedience. I think we are doing what's right for our people. We are defending the interests and the needs of New Yorkers under the law, and we're supporting law enforcement in the work it does. And as I said, this executive order is very vague. And our corporation counsel, Zach Carter, is here, former U.S. attorney earlier in his life, and made very clear to me today that if any action is taken as a result to restrict our funding, at that point we will bring legal action to stop it. So remember, the executive order, in addition to being vague, is theoretical. But if anything actually starts to move, the City of New York will take legal action to stop the executive order from hurting our people and our city.
And the first part of that, I mean, you said that what he could do is under the law, he couldn't, let's say, withhold transportation funding or school funding, but he could withhold probably NYPD funding, or at least theoretically. So can he do that without congressional approval, or is there a pocket of money that the president has that the NYPD is banking on?
Well, I'll start, and Zach may join in here, or Jimmy may join in here to add to it. Look, the way we read this, it identifies two agencies, Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice. Those agencies do provide some funding to New York City, primarily to the NYPD, to a lesser extent to the Department of Correction. By our understanding of the law, and a very recent and clear and sharp decision of the United States Supreme Court, the only action that can be taken is specifically related to the subject matter at hand, and it means those two agencies. So, lo and behold, what does that mean? This executive order, if it were to come to fruition, would substantially take money away from the NYPD. But again, if that were ever attempted, we would be in court immediately to stop it. And I know that will happen in cities all over the country. You want to add?
You know, as the mayor said, it is well established by Supreme Court authority that the federal government can't use the threat of withholding funds to coerce the states to conform with federal government-issued policies. I mean, that's a bedrock principle of federalism, and quite frankly, a bedrock conservative principle. Somewhat ironically. So that can't happen lawfully. With respect to funding that's law enforcement specific, you know, like other executive orders that have been issued over the last few days, there are hedges embedded right in the order itself. It gives the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security discretion to permit funding to law enforcement agencies. So it threatens on the one hand, but provides a safety valve on the other. So it appears to be, frankly, more gesture than legal force.
And one other thing I'll cue you to mention, the constant invoking of the phrase as appropriate under the law.
Correct.
Appropriate under the law.
That is absolutely correct. If you look at the executive order a couple of times, there is the language that the Attorney General and the Secretary have discretion to do things consistent with law. They know what the law says, and they know what the law permits and what it doesn't permit.
Council Carter,
yes.
You differed from what the mayor said regarding John Roberts' decision, because the mayor said that talked about putting a gun to the head of states.
That was John Roberts' words.
John Roberts.
Right.
Putting a gun to the head of states and cities. And you were very clear that it really just applies to states, that the Supreme Court has ruled that the federal government cannot coerce states into following certain policies, but
city's part of the state.
Right. Look at the executive order. The executive order refers to states and subdivisions thereof.
Correct.
All right.
Right.
But the cities being a creation of the state, the cities don't have the same authority, same standing vis-a-vis the federal government to sue. This has been established in the 1920s and 30s.
Well, to the extent that we are, first of all, we expect that we will have a cooperation with our state counterpart, the Attorney General of the state of New York. I mean but we are also, again, part of the state. We will have standing and capacity to sue, to defend the city against defunding.
We can get to the whole history of times we have been able to take legal action as a city. It's quite extensive, Laura.
The Comptroller's Office is saying, quoting us a figure, that there is the funding that's at stake here. I just want to make sure that this is consistent with what you are saying, that it is $156 million in urban area security initiative funding, and then 2 other grants of $6 million and $3 million apiece. Can you just break down what exactly you understand is the funding that's at risk here?
I can give you the total breakdown after the press conference, but out of that 150, 110 is UASI funds, and that's anti-terrorism funding. There is also funding for our federal task forces, which pays for overtime, and there's also transit counterterrorism overtime that's part of that also. And there's also funding we receive to cover all the missions, the UN missions and the national missions that are in New York City. So it's anywhere between It's above 150, and we're figuring anywhere between 150 and 160.
Is any of the grant funding that we're talking about here for programs like domestic violence victims?
There are miscellaneous grants that totals about 1.3 million, and I'd have to get you a breakdown of exactly what those grants are.
Let me just jump in for clarity. I think the simplest way to say it, first of all, very important. Nothing has happened yet. So remember, there's 2 outs in the executive order, and Zach will correct me if there's anything that needs to be said more sharply. 1, consistent with the law. So it sounds very intense and very powerful in the first instance until you say consistent with the law. That immediately gets you to the Supreme Court decision, and that limits the options of federal government, among other laws that will. 2, that law enforcement can be exempted. It says it right there in the executive order. That could be applied to say, well, wait a minute, in this case, we won't take resources away from the NYPD. We don't know yet. The minute any specific action to withhold funding were to occur, that's when Zach Carter is in court the next hour. And then we would, of course, seek an injunction to freeze any effort to remove our funding at the point of contact. So I want you to hear those procedural points because it's not real until it happens. Second, just to what the commissioner said, so when you add everything together, we're still analyzing, but as he said, somewhere in excess of 150 million. But overwhelmingly, that is anti-terrorism funding. Anti-terrorism funding is the thing they would have to take away. And then the second thing, as he mentioned, was the support we get to protect all of the leaders who come to New York City for the UN and so many other things that are crucial to the standing of the United States in the world. So these are big decisions the administration has to make. Do they actually want to take away that kind of funding from New York City? Yeah, Rich.
Mr. Mayor, so in some way, could Mr. Trump's order cut the funding to protect Trump Tower?
Rich, it's a fair question. Again, theoretically, it could be in the same bucket, but I would make the same point and then some. That I think that the president and his team are going to have to look long and hard at the notion of taking away anti-terrorism funding from New York City, taking away funding that protects foreign leaders who visit New York City, and taking away funding that protects Trump Tower and everyone who works in it and lives in it and visits it. So we'll see on each of those things. But the very fact this executive order would be aimed at the funding that keeps people safe is going to be something they'll have to think about long and hard.
2 questions. The first is just a numerical one. You held up a list of 170 offenses that you turn someone over to ICE. How many folks have been turned over to ICE each year under those 170 crimes?
I want to see if either Zach Carter or Nisha Argawal, who is our Commissioner for Immigrant Affairs, have those numbers handy, or do you want to get them back? We'll get them to you right after.
The second thing is, under the executive order, folks are deportable who've been convicted of any criminal offense, charged with any criminal offense, have committed acts that constitute a chargeable criminal offense. Are you reconsidering broken windows enforcement, given that you'll be saddling folks with criminal records and then subjecting them to potential deportation?
Look, let's take one thing at a time here. This has come out today, and as we're saying very squarely to you, we think there's a lot of vagueness in this executive order and tremendous opportunity for it to be challenged legally, let alone in the court of public opinion. So we're a long way from this having the effect that some may wish it to have. In the meantime, this is the safest big city in America. The NYPD continues to drive down crime while healing the relationship between police and community. We're going to stay on that track. It's as simple as that. Hold on. Look, I got some other folks, guys.
You mentioned the city seeking an injunction after a certain chain of events could happen.
Yeah.
What if the city is denied? How do you go about filling holes then?
Well, I want to say, first of all, Zach may want to jump in. We're not the only ones who are going to bring legal action. I think cities and states all over the country are going to bring legal action. Remember, President Obama put forward executive action on immigration, which a lot of us thought was a good idea. And you remember that played out in court over well over a year and a half, and ultimately was not able to proceed. So we have very recent history about proving to us that a presidential executive order is far from sacred, and there will be many, many jurisdictions that oppose this. And again, then there's a court of public opinion on top of it. And I think there's going to be many angles at which it is approached legally as well. Do you want to speak to it, or does that cover it? Okay. So that's why I'm not going to get into the business of theoretical next steps, because we think there's a long play out here. Congressman, please.
The issue of the Iwasi accounts just for a moment. The Iwasi accounts, when they were created 15 years ago, post 9/11, they've gone through a lot of politics in Washington. Many of the smaller cities and states around the country wanted more access to those accounts. I think it's important to note that they are based on threat assessment. So this is relevant to the Trump Towers. That's an increased threat assessment here in the city now that didn't exist maybe 3 or 4 months ago. So I think in that sense that these are reevaluated every year, and the allotment is based on a threat assessment and that's why New York City has such a great portion that we are under threat.
Constantly. Really?
The executive order also says that the federal government will essentially deputize local law enforcement to act as immigration officers, and it empowers the Secretary of Homeland Security to begin, or the Justice Department to begin negotiations with states and cities to do that. How will you respond?
I'll start and would welcome the Commissioner or Corporation Counsel to jump in if you want to after I start. We're not going to allow our police officers to be used as immigration enforcement agents. It's very simple. We have come so far in making this city safe and in building a better relationship between police and community. We are not going to take the very people who keep us safe every day and turn them against the communities they serve. It's as simple as that.
Given that New York is one of the few states left with a Democratic governor, do you think that Albany should make up the difference as far as any lost federal funds?
I don't even want to get into a discussion of lost federal funds because, again, I never hold it against you guys that you want to ask the theoretical or the situational question of what we might do in each circumstance. I want you to hear loud and clear, and I think the example I gave about President Obama's executive action should put a point on it for you. We are going to fight this, and cities and states all over the country are going to fight it. And looking at, and I yield to the Corporation Counsel on this, we are immediately struck by how vague it is and how subject to challenge it is. We're also struck by how many outs this executive order gives itself and gives the administration. So we're not going to get into the theoreticals of what we would do if we had funding cut. We have not had funding cut at this moment. We're going to continue to do our work. Do you want to add? Or okay. Anyone on this side? Anyone on this side? Yes.
Yeah. Speaker Mark Viverito and Congressman Crowley both talked about how Trump is trying to essentially criminalize immigrants. But he speaks very clearly that he's really just talking about illegal aliens. And even among those, just ones who have, like, say, committed crime. I just want to know, do you see a difference between illegal aliens or undocumented immigrants, legal immigrants, who are most of the immigrants in New York City, and Americans generally? Like, should there be any distinction made?
Look, it's simple. I appreciate the ideological bent of your question, but I will answer it very clearly. I agree 100% with Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito. There has been an attempt to demonize immigrants across the board. That's what's happening here. And the vast majority, even of the undocumented, are law-abiding people. And that's not pointed out in this discussion. The first words out of his mouth were his characterization of Mexicans as rapists and criminals. So this is not even close. This has been a very systematic, and this is where Steve Bannon is behind this 100%. This has been a systematic effort to demonize people of color and immigrants, and it's playing out today. Yes?
Mayor, did you discuss this at all in your meeting with Donald Trump first? And the second question is, you've often said you think because Donald Trump is a New Yorker that he wouldn't do things that would harm the city. Do you think you need to recalculate that assumption?
I appreciate both questions. On the first one, when I met with President-elect in the week after the election, we spoke specifically about the New York City law. This same list categories. I did not hand him the list, but I went over with him, and at that moment, actually, Jeff Sessions had come into the room literally at that point in the conversation. So we had a conversation, all three of us. And I said, here is an example of a middle ground that works. This city, which is very interested in public safety and in keeping law and order intact, this city, by law, by a vote of our city council and a bill signed by me, determined 170 categories of crime, where if someone commits these crimes, they are undoubtedly going to be deported, and we're going to work with the federal authorities on that. I then emphasized that what we wanted to guard against was individuals who had done exceedingly low-level crimes. And I'll give you examples. Someone has small amount of marijuana. Someone who committed a traffic offense that did not cause any harm to anyone else. You'll look at this list. I want to ask all of you, please, this is such an important issue. Literally, for hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers right now, they're very deeply concerned. When you look at this list, you will not doubt for a moment this covers everything conceivable in terms of serious and violent crime. So I explained that to the President-elect. I explained that to the Attorney General. And I said, this is a model, and I know other cities have similar approaches that could address the fair concerns people have about those who commit serious crime, but respect millions of others who are part of the fabric of our communities. There was two parts, I'm sorry.
The second question was, you said that you didn't think Donald Trump would hurt the city because he is a New Yorker. Do you think with this action today that you need to be cognizant?
I think your statement's a little too generous in terms of what I said previously, meaning I was not that blank check for the president. I said I hoped that the president, as a New Yorker, would remember where he came from and would understand what his words had meant and his proposals had meant already. I told him about the fear they had created, and I told them that I didn't doubt he loved the city, but he had to understand what 8.5 million people were experiencing as a result of his words and proposals. Today, we see something that's very troubling and is not encouraging at all. But again, I'm not going to minimize the danger for a moment, but I am going to tell you in terms of how we stand and fight. When we look at this executive order, we think there's lots of ways to stand and fight.
Two more questions.
Anyway, let me just ask, anyone didn't get one who has one before we go back to Laura? Yeah.
Is it at all possible, or is it in the realm of the imagination of lawmakers here, you, that the many millions of dollars in tax abatements that he's given on his buildings might be reevaluated?
Well, Henry, that is a rather fascinating proposal. If we do it, we'll call it Henry's Law. Hadn't thought of that one. I will certainly have the authorities look into that. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you specifically about this line from the executive order that says the director of OMB is directed to obtain and provide relevant and responsive information on all federal grant money that currently is received by any sanctuary jurisdiction. Are you saying that you understand that to mean just DOJ and DHS, or that's...
No, we talked about this. I'll start and you jump in, or come on over and help me. I'll start. I'll speak English. He'll speak lawyer. We believe, again, there are a series of vague items, somewhat contradictory items, items that could be implemented one way or another. There's a lot going on. We think the Supreme Court decision, written by Justice Roberts, suggests narrowness, very clear, or demands narrowness, that it only can relate to the specific agencies that are the subject. So that would be Homeland Security and Justice. That's how we read this. That's if they wanted, if they wanted to threaten funding, it would be those two agencies, which specifically means, from a New York City point of view, overwhelmingly NYPD and a lesser extent correction. On that last line, that's a nice line to include, but we don't believe that conforms with the law.
I agree. I believe that that last line falls into the category of gesture. It raises alarms. But again, in the earlier parts of the executive law, it talks about everything having to be consistent with law. And I think they knew as they drafted this that broad catch-all in the end that asked OMB to look at all funding streams without regard to whether or not they were related to immigration enforcement is clearly not in play.
What makes you think, though, given the president's demonstrated ability or willingness to do things outside of what we might see as normal in the scope of political activity, that he doesn't intend to, I mean, he's going to nominate a new Supreme Court justice and could potentially have a majority in the Supreme Court that could relitigate that.
Well, you used two different words. You used ability and willingness, and they're very different. he might be willing to do a lot of things. He's not able to do very much.
Can I add, and Zach, you're the Supreme Court expert. You will catch me if I make a mistake here. 2012, Justice Scalia was alive. The court makeup was the same as it will be when the president names another member.
That's correct.
So it was a Republican-dominated court and a decision written by Chief Justice Roberts. So when you say unusual things have been happening in America, you're right about that. But that's a real recent decision, and it's a very clear decision, and we think that's going to be dispositive. Thanks, everyone.
Were you joking about looking into the tax abatement?
I heard it for the first time, Willie. Just take it as a joke for now.
All right, thank you, folks. That will conclude today's streaming sessions of the Daily Ticker. We will stream every single day starting at 6 a.m. That's Pacific, all the way until 3 p.m. That's also Pacific. Every single day, 5 days a week. So 5 business days. We also upload daily breaking news on days that we're not too busy. And we'll try to bring them up as we go along. But for now, you know, we got to get everything situated. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for watching. Again, we upload every single day. We're going to stream, all week. So make sure to stay here with us. If you are new to our community, hit that subscribe button. If you already subscribed, don't forget to hit the bell right next to the subscribe button. It'll give you the notification of when we go live. Right now, I guess there are protests going on in New York City. We do not give anti-American terrorists any airtime here, but you're more than welcome to go watch it on another live stream. So yeah, guys, thank you very much. Hope to see you guys here next time. But until then, peace.